Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning that is customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more and book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. All right, this week's question comes from the YFP Facebook group, where an individual asks, how long after your PSLF says 0 of 120 payments remaining do you actually receive documentation of forgiveness? Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Well, man, it has to feel good to see that, you're at the end of the rainbow there. And you're kind of just tentatively waiting for that forgiveness to come through. So I'll answer this kind of in two phases. One is what the studentaid.gov website says. So it basically states, and then I'll answer it from kind of practical experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the website says that the processing for PSLF, the time varies just based on a number of factors. So the first one is, whether you've previously submitted documentation of employment for review, or you submitted documentation only at the time of when you applied for PSLF. So what a lot of people don't know is you could be essentially in PSLF without being in PSLF, which means, you've been working for a nonprofit making your 120 payments, but you've done no paperwork.
Yep.
You can really wait to the end and do all the paperwork, but from a processing perspective, it's going to take a lot of time. Now, if you do it year one, year two, year three, and you're basically doing it in segments, obviously, they're going to look at, hey, we were at X amount of payments. Now we were at 108 payments, and now we're at 120. Like we're good to go. So we've already kind of verified the 108 before that. So it's basically, have you been doing it piecemeal along the way? Another factor is how many employers have you had? Have there been any gaps in your employment or your payment history? And if there's any, follow up or back and forth required. So they don't necessarily put a time down, but it basically says the shorter, it's going to take longer if you've kind of just waited to the end to submit the
Mm-hmm.
paperwork. Um, so when I was talking to the team about this, there's really not a kind of a time, but I would say within the month. So within the first payment. So I've heard like basically probably a few weeks. And if we go beyond that month, then what we typically recommend is submit the paperwork again,
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, I'm still here. Like what's up? If your PSLF application is approved, you will be notified that the remaining balance of your eligible direct loans will be forgiven, including the principal and the outstanding interest. And then any overpayments will actually be refunded to you, so you'll get those
Yes.
back. And we've had a couple instances of that. They were through the loan servicer and not necessarily through the Department of Ed. So to me, it's I would be patient but not too patient. Obviously 10 years or more in the making. I would say, if you have another payment come due and you haven't received forgiveness, I would be
Mm-hmm.
on the horn saying, hey, what's up, and probably resubmit my application. um I think again, this isn't necessarily an evergreen answer, because we could have a period where the number of applications for PSLF just comes in because of maybe something that happened 10 years ago
Yep.
from this date, where people are like, oh, I need to really get into PSLF. So you could have ebbs and flows in terms of the amount, the number. And we know that, again, this is the government, not necessarily the most efficient at processing paperwork all the time. So I would say be patient, but not too
Mm-hmm.
patient, and kind of think of it in weeks instead of like months or beyond. So, yeah, the answer they give is, hey, these are the factors, but we're not really going to give an answer in
Yeah.
terms of the timeline. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you added, Tim, the point of clarification. Probably one of the most common questions I get is like, when do you apply for PSLF, right? And so I think the clarification you made a really, really important one. You can technically be making qualifying payments all along. And some people may not even realize it, until years later. And then they go to apply for forgiveness at a later point in time. I think best practice ideally is we're keeping good records, right? We're submitting those employer certification forms. We've got documentation of qualifying payments, and it's not a surprise. But for folks that are listening that are like, well, wait a minute, maybe I've been making PSLF qualifying payments and I didn't even realize it. It's not too late, is the message, that's out there.
Yeah, and I just had this conversation with a really intelligent person about this very issue, and it was like, oh, like I didn't really know it was retroactive. I thought I had to be in this
From jump.
program the whole time,
Yeah.
and I'm like, no. And
Hmm.
I think they were making some assumptions about their particular case where, it's, hey, I can kind of continue on the path and pay X, or you can pay a hell of a lot less, or even zero, because you're kind of
Yeah.
beyond the forgiveness. So yeah, definitely something to look into. I think even today, we're I think the way the program come out in 2007, we're X amount of years into this program. There's still a lot of
Yeah.
misconceptions about how it's actually administered.
Yeah, and a shout out to our team, Tim, who is doing this on the regular with clients and others through our student loan analysis service that we have. Individuals can learn more about that at yourfinancialpharmacist.com/SLA. That's a chance to work one-on-one with one of our student loan experts to analyze your personal situation, your student loan repayment options, and ultimately be able to choose that best repayment strategy for your personal situation. For folks that are hearing this saying, Tim and Tim, this is great. Tell me more about PSLF. I would say to you, we have covered this extensively on the podcast, on the blog. We're not going to rehash that here today. So you can go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. You can Google Your Financial Pharmacist Public Service Loan Forgiveness. You'll find lots of information that we have out there. And also shout out to the Department of Ed. I think we heckle them periodically, Tim, but they've done a really good job in the last few years with updating tools, calculators,
Yeah.
information, employer checkups, all those types of things. So make sure to check out their resources as well at studentaid.gov. All right. So this week's question again came from the YFP Facebook group. If you're not already a member of that group, I hope you will consider joining over 9,000 other pharmacist colleagues all across the country. Lots of great questions that come up, such as this one, people thinking about investing, retirement planning, student loan questions. You can find us again at the Your Financial Pharmacist Facebook group. And if you have a question that you'd like to have featured on an upcoming episode of this podcast, we would love to hear from you. You can send us an email with your question, info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record your question by going to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP. And as we wrap up this week's episode, an important reminder that the content is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. For more information, visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks so much for listening and have a great rest of your week.